Hi there and welcome to Patterns in Time. It's less than a week until Rosh Hashanah, and so obviously that is what we are going to be talking about today. Rosh Hashanah recalls the creation of the world, as we see from the prayer, "Today the world was born." Every holiday has, in essence, two components. One is the common denominator that makes it a holiday. That is going to be the same for all the holidays. It's going to be a day of rest, very similar to Shabbat in its laws. Can't work, can't do business, those kinds of things. It's going to be a holy day, and therefore we're going to have extra prayers, we're going to have a Torah reading, we're going to have meals and kiddush and those kinds of things. And in that regard, Rosh Hashanah, Pesach, whatever other holiday you want, if it's a biblical holiday, they're all the same. Then there is the second component, which makes any given holiday unique. Its unique sensibility based on what it commemorates. The precepts, the commandments, the practices of that holiday are going to be based on that unique flavor that it has. So Pesach, for example, the anniversary of our Exodus, commemorating the Exodus, is obviously going to have a completely different flavor with completely different mitzvahs than, let's say, Yom Kippur, which is the anniversary of when we received atonement for the sin of the golden calf. In that regard, Rosh Hashanah commemorates the creation of the world, and therefore we blow the shofar to coronate God as master of the world, being that he now created a world to be master over. Hence, the phrase, "Today the world was born," Hayom Haras Elam, is what we say right in connection to, or the connection with, the blowing of the shofar itself. Now, according to our sages, however, the world was created on the 25th of Elul. So that Rosh Hashanah actually marks the sixth day of creation, the day on which God created man. And so now we have two questions. First and foremost, why are we celebrating the wrong day? We should be celebrating the anniversary of the creation of the world, not the anniversary of the creation of man. And number two, even if somehow we can explain, and eventually, of course, we do, why it is that we celebrate the anniversary of the creation of man and not the anniversary of the creation of the world, why are we saying something that seems patently false? Today the world was born. That's simply not true. Today man was made. You could celebrate that, but then be accurate in the liturgy. Why do we commemorate the creation of man and not the creation of the whole world? This is especially strange, given that the creation of the world demonstrates God's absolute power and his unique ability to create something from nothing. We'll note that there is a fundamental difference in how God created everything else and how God created man. When it comes to everything else, God said, "Let there be," and whatever it is, and it was. "Let there be light," and there was light. "Let there be a firmament," and there was a firmament. "Let there be this," and there was this. Whatever it is. A single step process, God says, the thing exists. When it comes to man, that's not the case at all. The verses tell us that God takes from the dust of the earth and he forms man, meaning the physical body. And then, in a second step, something that does not occur with any other creation, he breathes in a soul into that body. So everything was created, something from nothing. Nothing existed. God said, "Let there be whatever the object is," and then it was. When it comes to man, it's not that simple because there is that two-step process. So if we're going to focus on what is really something God can do that we cannot do, well, creation, something from nothing, that further points to the fact that we should be celebrating the anniversary of the creation of the world and not the anniversary of the creation of man. Only God's essence, free of all limitation, can bring about being from utter void, to the extent that, at least in Hebrew, the concept behind the word creation, to create, is specifically something from nothing, creation ex nihilo, and it's only possible by God. What people do isn't creation. What people do is transformation. A person, an artisan, can take raw material, matter in one form, and transform it into matter in a different form, a completed vessel. But when it comes to creation, people don't create. Creation, in Hebrew at least, is something from nothing. That's uniquely a divine power. The 25th of Elul, the first day of the world's existence, is further distinguished by being referred to in the Torah as Yom Echad rather than Yom Rishon. When we look at the first chapter of Genesis, in the actual Torah scroll especially, we see that each day's occurrences are divided into its respective paragraph. Each day gets its own paragraph, and at the end of each respective paragraph, we have the verse, and it was evening and it was morning, Vayi'er, Vayiveker, Yom, whatever. The second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. When it comes to the first day, it doesn't say the first day. It doesn't say Yom Rishon. It says Yom Echad, one day or day one. Now, every single day, it says one thing, one form of the number, second, third, not two or three. When it comes to the first day, it doesn't say first, it says one. The sages look at that and say, well, wait. The Torah has to be consistent, and it's not being consistent. It's not by mistake that it's not being consistent. There's some kind of a message here. Torah thus indicates that on the first day of creation, God was alone in his world. So in the same way, with exactly the same verbiage that we say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Hashem Echad, the very same word Echad, is the very same word that's used Yom Echad. So rather than reading it as one day or even day one, we maybe should read it as the day of oneness. When we say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, we are not just negating the existence of other deities. We're not saying that God is the only God. We're saying that God is the only real thing, the only bona fide autonomous existence. And so, on the first day, being called the day of oneness, there was only God. Now, you may say, well, okay, he hadn't really started creating anything yet, so obviously it was only him. Not true. Though the entire created world already existed on the first day, it was not separate from its creator. The world was one with God. A common misconception, and it's easy to get to this misconception from the simple reading of the verses without paying attention to detail, is that on the first day, God created light. On the second day, God created the firmament. On the third day, God created vegetation. On the fourth day, God created the sun and the stars, and so on and so forth. Each day, God created whatever he created. Not so. We see, especially from the fourth day's verbiage, God does not say, let there be the luminaries, meaning the sun and the moon. He says, let the luminaries be in the firmament, as if they already exist, and he's just placing them in their position, in their role in creation. And that's in fact exactly what the sages tell us. Rashi, in his commentary on the Torah, the simple basic meaning of the verse, points to that peculiarity and says that's how everything was, other than man, who was created at the very, very end. Everything was created on the first day, and on each subsequent day, the events that are described in those verses for those days isn't the creation of those things, it's the placement of those things in their respective roles and positions. So on the first day, everything basically, other than man, already existed, and nevertheless, the whole world was one with God, completely nullified before him. He was the only thing. It was the day of oneness. How can you be celebrating anything other than this day? It's the day when God first and really showed his power, his uniquely divine power of making something from nothing. It's the day when everything in the world was nullified before God. The day of oneness. How could anything be greater than that? And nevertheless, that's exactly what we see. We don't celebrate the anniversary of that, the first day of creation. We celebrate the anniversary of the creation of man. Despite its uniqueness, the 25th of Elul is eclipsed by Rosh Hashanah, the anniversary of the creation of man. This is because the creation of man opened up a new and deeper relationship between God and the created world. Of all the beings in the physical and spiritual realms, man alone can choose to accept God's sovereignty. Again, because of that two-step process that we described earlier, everything else doesn't have a duality. Everything was made in a one-step process. And so God made it in a particular way with a particular design, pre-programmed as it were. And that programming, that plan for its behavior is hardwired to who it is or what it is. Doesn't matter what the creation is, living, inanimate, doesn't matter. When it comes to man, we have a two-step process in man's creation, which gives man a godly part and an animal part, giving him the choice to behave like the former or like the latter. Only his relationship with God, only man's relationship with God, stems from conscious decision and free will. Though God creates and regulates all the other beings in the universe, obviously, they do not consciously accept this relationship. Their link with God flows from God's creativity. It does not result from their own decision because, again, they were made in a one-step process from God to them, hardwired. When man is made in a two-step process, that allows for man to choose between the two sides that are his existence. With the creation of man, God introduced the potential for voluntary acceptance of his unity and active consent to his will. Hasidic thought illustrates the difference between God's relationship with man and his relationship with the remainder of creation by contrasting two forms of absolute rule, tyranny and sovereignty. Now, obviously, a tyrant and a sovereign, a king, are completely in charge of their populace, but the way that they are in charge of them is fundamentally different. A tyrant exercises dominion without his subjects' consent, by virtue of his might. He doesn't care if the people accept him or not. He'll bowl them over if they don't. The subjects of a king, even if he is an absolute ruler, may willingly accept his authority and seek his sovereignty, and that's exactly what he wants. Our sages say that ein melech b'lei am. There's no such thing as a king without a nation. Now, on the simple level, that means that, well, in order to rule over a nation, in order to be a king, you obviously have to have a nation to rule over. But that is not the extent of the intent of the sages' words. The sages' deeper meaning is that the king wants a nation to accept him, so that it's not just by fiat that he rules, but rather by a symbiotic relationship. Yes, he's in charge, top down, but they accept that bottom up. Unlike every other created being, man has the choice of acquiescing to God's dominion or rebelling against it. He alone has been empowered to acknowledge the unity of God through his own thought processes and to relate to him as his sovereign. Why must God's sovereignty be consciously perceived by man? From God's perspective, his unity with the world encompasses every facet of creation. God's infinite. Man is rarely able to conceive of God's unity from this perspective because man is finite. Why then should mere man's awareness and recognition be of such importance? I walk down the street and I'm walking by bugs and insects and whatever else on the ground. I couldn't care less. I don't know what they're doing and I don't care. And we're quantitatively different. I'm limited. That bug is limited. I'm maybe somehow more developed than the bug, but that's only a question of amount, quantitative difference. I'm finite. God is infinite. That's not quantitative. That's qualitative. Why in the world would an infinite God care whether a finite entity, a finite creation, accepts his dominion, not accepts his dominion, tyrant, sovereign, whatever? Our sages teach that God created the world because he desired a dwelling place in the lower worlds. The word in the Hebrew that's used there is nisave, from the word taiva, which means a desire, a want that is supra-rational. A desire is not something that I want that I can explain. I want a safe car in order to, have my family safe when I'm taking them on trips. That's logical. Yes, that's what I want, but I can explain what I want. And there are many things like that. Many things that we want, not anything special or maybe something special, but explicable. When it comes to a desire, my favorite color is pink or whatever. Why not something else? Because that's what I like. There is no explanation. That's the word that's used in the sage's expression in the Medrash as far as why God made the world. God made the world because he desired a dwelling place in the lower world, beyond explanation. Does it make sense that an infinite God should care what a finite being thinks, accepts, doesn't accept, etc.? No, that is not logical at all, and that's fine because this is a desire. It is supra-rational. In order for this desire to be completely realized, the establishment of a dwelling place requires not only the godly energy be extended into those lowly realms, but also that those realms be aware of the godliness in their midst and accept it. Only then is God's place in the world, in the lower worlds, complete. Before man's creation, godliness and the world appear to be opposites. The world, from its own perspective, did not relate to the godly potential with which it is invested. Only with the creation of man did the possibility of an internalized awareness of God come into being. Now, man was created not only for the purpose of expressing unity with God in his own life, he was also given the potential, and therefore the responsibility, to suffuse the entire world with an awareness of God's unity. Again, if this was only an accomplishment of man for his own sake or in his own right, then you'd have a world with 99.9% no acceptance and possibility of acceptance of God's sovereignty. And man, yes, can accept God's sovereignty. But what does that help? God wants a dwelling place in the lower worlds, in the entirety of the lower worlds, not just in this little swath of creation that is man. But when man uses the rest of the world in serving God from an understanding and acceptance of his sovereignty, of God's sovereignty, then the rest of the world is also a part of that same service that is unique to man and his free will. Adam, the first man, gave expression to this potential on the first day of his existence by addressing all of creation. Come, let us bow down. Let us bend the knee before God, our maker. In essence, Adam says, let us. Who's us? There's only one person. Let us means all of the created beings. You all don't have free will. You on your own cannot serve God. I have free will. I can serve God. Join me. Be my resources in serving God, and then you will be a part of something that otherwise you cannot be a part of. All of a sudden, man imparts that unique connection that he has with God through accepting his sovereignty to the rest of the world, and the whole of the world becomes a dwelling place for God. By imparting his superior relationship with God to the entire world, man becomes God's partner in creation and contributes a necessary element to the world's existence, a conscious union with God. It's worthwhile to note that in the verse that prohibits the cursing of a judge, the judge who sits in court, in Jewish court, one of the prohibitions of the Torah is you're not allowed to curse a judge. The word for judge in that verse is actually one of God's names, Elikim, the very same name of Genesis 1:1 in the beginning of God creating the heavens and the earth. The question is asked, why in the world would the Torah open the door for even some amount of misunderstanding, assigning some level of divinity to a person? That's a little bit of a problem. It's not, of course, that we're assigning divinity to a person, but the sages explain that a judge, when adjudicating properly, becomes a partner with God in creation. How is that the case? When we have some court case, some dispute, it has to be about something that's worth some kind of money or has some value. A swath of land, a particular possession, actual money, whatever it is. Two people, or maybe more than two people, are arguing over a particular resource. While that resource is the subject of this dispute, nobody can really use it because it hasn't been resolved who's right and who's wrong, to whom does that resource belong. When the judge, when the tribunal, properly adjudicates and says, okay, this swath of land that, Reuven and Shimon were arguing over, it belongs to Reuven. Now, Reuven can take possession of that resource and ostensibly will use it for God's service. While it was under dispute, it's as if the resource didn't exist because it had no purpose. Nobody could do anything with it. But now that it has been properly adjudicated, that resource has purpose again. It's as if it has been recreated. Therefore, the judge becomes a partner with God in creation. That is a uniquely human ability to do. The animals and the vegetation or whatever cannot become partners with God in creation because only the human being has that ability to choose whether to do what's right or not. And when he does what's right with other resources, then he partners with God as if in creating those resources. This uniquely human perception of God's pervasive unity makes Rosh Hashanah, the day of man's creation, eclipse the 25th of Elul, the anniversary of the world's creation. For the potential for oneness with God that came into being with man's creation overshadowed all previous levels of creation. So now we understand why we're celebrating on the day that we're celebrating. But we had a second question. We said, even if we can explain why we should celebrate the anniversary of man's creation and not the anniversary of the world's creation, why are we saying today the world was born in the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah? That's simply not true. Today, man was born, not the world. The question, however, remains. Why do our Rosh Hashanah prayers proclaim that the world was formed on that date? Even if it's acknowledged that Rosh Hashanah, the anniversary of man's creation, takes precedence, it was on the 25th of Elul that the world was created. This question can be answered by reference to a point of Talmudic law, which relates to ritual purity. The laws of purity apply only to objects in a state of completion. Purity and impurity are often confused with cleanliness and dirtiness. Sometimes you'll see outright mistranslations of the word impure as unclean. And so people get the misconception that a pig is somehow dirtier than a cow, because a pig is impure and a cow is pure, so the pig is rendered as unclean and the cow is rendered as clean. The reality is that they're both very, very dirty. Cleanliness has nothing to do with purity. Cleanliness is a physical state. A person can be clean, an animal, whatever, can be clean. A person can be dirty. Purity is a spiritual condition. A person can be out of a schwitz, out of a sauna, completely as clean as humanly possible, but be impure. And vice versa. A person could be pure and have jumped into a mud pit. One has nothing to do with the other. If purity and impurity has nothing to do with physical cleanliness or dirtiness, what's the functional definition of purity or impurity? The functional definition of impurity is when reality falls short of potential. Any and all cases of impurity, whether it's a human being, whether it's an animal, whatever, is a case of when reality falls short of potential. Two classic examples. A woman becomes impure if she sees blood at that time of the month. The potential was that she could have become expecting. She didn't become expecting. Blood flows as a result. Reality fell short of potential. She becomes impure. The quintessential example is a dead body. A person passes away, his body is the source of impurity. The potential was that he'd be alive still to serve God. The reality is that he died 5 minutes ago. Reality fell short of potential. We have impurity. Impurity didn't exist with creation because initially the world was perfect. Reality was 100% fulfilling potential. It was only with the sin of the tree of knowledge that we begin the concept of impurity is introduced into the world. At that point, reality fell short of potential and continued to do so until the giving of the Torah, when once again, Paschal Zu Masam, we don't have any more impurity in the world because the world has achieved full potential revelation of divinity. But once again, with the sin of the golden calf, impurity, reality falling short of potential returns, and that's where we are now. When Mashiach comes, God promises that I will get rid of all of the impurity from the world. Because at that point, reality will achieve potential. When we have an object that is still incomplete, when we have raw material, we can't measure potential. We don't yet know what we're talking about. A completed object, an object in a state of completion, has a potential, and we can judge whether reality has achieved potential or has fallen short of potential. Until we have an object in a state of completion, we can't judge because we don't yet have a defined potential. Therefore, the laws of purity apply only to objects in a state of completion. For example, A shapeless piece of metal cannot become impure until it is fashioned into a useful object. Though the metal obviously exists, the laws of ritual purity do not yet relate to it. The object cannot be said to have come into being until it has been completed. Certain objects may be thought of as complete at any one of a number of stages. Animal hides, for example, can be used at one stage as covers or blankets, or they can be further treated and refined and made into clothing. Imagine that a substance which imparts impurity comes into contact with a hide in a less developed state. We can make an easy argument for that hide being pure or being impure. Is the hide ritually impure because it can be used as a cover at this stage? In other words, at this point, you could argue that it's a completed vessel, a completed object. It's a cover, it's a blanket, and something impure has touched it. Now it can become impure. Or is it still pure because it can be further processed into a garment? And at the level that it could technically serve as a blanket is irrelevant. I'm looking to make, whatever, footballs or garments or something. And so what do I care that at that point somebody could huddle under it and make it into a blanket? It's still raw material in my mind, and therefore the fact that it touched impurity makes no difference. The Mishnah rules that the status of the hide is dependent upon its owner. If the owner would be expected to be content with the hide as a cover, so at that point to him it's a completed vessel, the hide is impure. It became a completed vessel as a cover. Impurity touched it, the laws apply, it's impure. However, if the owner is a tanner, who would ordinarily consider the hide to be unfinished at this stage, and would be expected to further refine it in order to make it a garment, it is still pure, because to him, I don't care the fact that somebody can make it into a cover. For me, it's still raw material, and therefore it's not in a state of completion. The laws of impurity don't yet apply. This halacha, this law, lends us a conception of the status of creation before the advent of man. The 25th of Elul and the following days of creation revealed awesome godly powers. These powers were, however, totally eclipsed by the creation of man, which revealed a deeper purpose of creation and a higher aspect of godliness, just as the animal hide can be transformed into a garment by a skilled tanner. In essence, in the example of the world, who is the owner? God. And because God's desire in making the world was his desire in having a dwelling place in the lower worlds, until that's possible, all of the rest of creation is like raw material. What do I care that somebody can possibly huddle under that hide and make it a cover? To me, I'm a tanner. I'm looking to make a garment. It's still raw material. What does God care that all of these things exist? Until and unless the world can accept and choose to partner with God in creation, it's just raw material. And so until man comes on the scene, the whole of the world is not really in a state of completion. The revelation occasioned by man's creation caused the world's prior existence to be considered unfinished. Through the creation of man, God established a new definition of existence, and according to this new definition, the world did not previously exist. The anniversary of man's creation can therefore be considered the anniversary of creation as a whole, and so now, not only are we celebrating the correct day, but we're actually accurately stating today the world was born. Until man comes on the scene, it's not a world, it's just raw material. The ultimate state of unity between God and the world will be expressed in the era of the redemption, when the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed. This will be accomplished through man's efforts. The revelation of godliness in the era of the redemption depends on our present endeavors to perceive and express the godliness invested within the world. By developing a conscious bond with God, extending that relationship to every element of our existence, we bring close to the time when that connection will blossom forth into complete fulfillment in the era of the redemption. May this be realized in the immediate future. Wishing everyone a Ksiv V'Chasim Teva, Lashon Teva B'Sukkah, to be signed and sealed in a wonderful and sweet new year.